Hello, good morning, welcome. Before we get going, I just want to say if you hear any screaming in the background, my neighbors are having a wonderful time playing outside right now, and I think I've got them, but if you hear anything, that's what it is. Welcome to Coffee Chat Double Shot. I only have a single shot, but coffee. And I wanted to start off before we hop in with an announcement. I'm supposed to do the channel intro. Sorry, one sec. Hello, friends, and welcome to my channel, which is for anyone who cares about language, technology, and other people. Hopefully you're all doing great. I'm doing pretty good. It's actually really nice to just hear my neighbors outside playing, but I'm hoping the mic doesn't pick it up. I have started a coffee. So the little heart in the mug symbol down there is for coffee, KO-FI. Same place as it everywhere, RC Tapman. And if you would like hi Naveen, welcome. If you would like the notes, so all the links written down for everything that we're going to talk today, there is, so if you go here and then to the membership tab, there's a membership level, which is if you would care to support me, I'd appreciate it so that I can keep doing this. And also things like eating food and living inside a building and not outside of a building. There's a monthly donation and you'll get all the links and they're just typed up. So if you're interested, I would appreciate it. If you're not able to, I understand. Let's hop into it. So we're going to start off with research. I have little tabs between the topics because I think it'll help us keep a little bit more organized. So I've got a bunch of research papers, and then we're going to talk about, I believe the next thing is ethics, it is, and then sort of news, politics, legislation, that sort of thing. And then finally, just some miscellaneous stuff and a little palate cleanser, because I think particularly some of the discussion today might get a little bit heavy, and I think it's nice to have, multiple emotions, and not just negative ones. So research, let's hop in. So last week, it may still be ongoing, it might just be into the workshops now, was ACL in Ireland, in Dublin, which is a big publication venue. So a lot of the research discussion and some of the ethics discussion is going to be from ACL. So that's the Association of Computational Linguistics, and it's the major publication venue in the field. So we're going to start off with this paper, Can Transformer, I don't know if that's a typo or not. That might be they're using that as the name for the class of models. Be too compositional, analyzing idiom processing in neural machine translation, not natural machine translation, by Verna Donkers. Apologies if I mispronounce anybody's name. Please feel free to correct me. I always appreciate that. Christopher Lucas and Ivan Titov. Again, apologies if I'm saying it wrong. So let me zoom in a little bit. I think this is a little bit, sorry, it sounds like they're having a very fun game. They're so loud, bless them. I just want to break this down a little bit in case these are things that you are not familiar with. So idioms are chunks of words where the meaning of the chunk of word is, the whole chunk, and it cannot be, divided into its compositional parts. But basically it's stuff you'd have to memorize when you were learning a language. So one class of idioms is what preposition do you use, right? So in the US we say you get, I'm getting on the bus. You could say I'm getting in the bus, but it feels a little bit weird. And you'd never say I'm getting on top of the bus, even if it's a double-decker bus and you're going to the top, right? You'd always say, this sort of calcified phrase, or you look like the cat that ate the canary, right? It's an idiom, it's an expression. The whole thing is you look very satisfied with yourself, you look very smug. So just some examples of idioms, and this is looking at how they're processed in neural machine translation, so neural deep learning, machine translation, translating from one human language to another in an automated way. Mirth, ethics NLP heaviness. I think this might be right up my alley. Well, in that case, I'm glad to have you. It's nice listening to it on background while doing boring work. Fabulous. I am also a big background listener. I have a really hard time doing one thing, and it has annoyed many people in my life in the past. So that's the sort of general sorts of things they're talking about. Unlike literal expressions, idioms' meanings do not directly follow from their parts posing, sorry, they wrote posing, I just didn't read posing, a challenge for neural machine translation. NMT models are often unable to translate idioms accurately and overgenerate compositional literal translations. So in the example of, you look like the cat that ate the canary, if I were going to translate that into another language, I might literally say, you look like the cat that has feasted upon the bird, and not say something like, oh, you look really smug, right? So that's an example of when it would be wrong to translate word by word. Hello, Alexander, welcome. This is a paper looking specifically at compositionality of idioms using transformers in neural machine translation by looking at attention patterns moving from English to other European languages. So pretty typologically pretty constrained. They're not looking at a lot of different types of languages, but you know, it's what's easy for a lot of people. The key finding is when the transformer emits a non-literal translation, i.e. identifies the expression as idiomatic, so the cat that ate the canary being translated as you look very smug, the encoder processes idioms more strongly as single lexical units compared to literal expressions. So literal expression, so something like you look like a dog that's been rolling around in mud, which I would expect to mean that you look really muddy, not something like you look really happy because dogs love mud, right? If that makes sense. Would be the difference between the two. This manifests in idioms parts being grouped through attention and in reduced interaction between idioms and their context. In the decoder's cross-attention, figurative inputs result in reduced attention in source-side tokens. These results suggest the transformer's tendency to process idioms as compositional expressions contributes to the literal translations of idioms. Hi, Hector. Welcome to the stream. So basically the finding is good, right? Transformers are, as a class of models, are doing what you would expect. They are treating idioms, things that should be treated as chunks, and they are treating things that you should compose further correctly and composing them further when looking at attention. Again, if you're hearing screaming, I apologize. It's outside of my control. All right. So that was from ACL. Next up, we have, just scooch that down a little bit. There we go. So this is by Rada, a Twitter thread of discussions at a panel at ACL on the next big idea in NLP. So a bunch of different people, contributed, and they're all cited here. Just to go through them, I think this is always particularly interesting because I think we as a field, so both NLP and machine learning, don't always do a great job communicating outside the field, like what is doable, what is interesting, what is useful, and like where we're going and where it's feasible to go. And I think part of that comes down to funding pressure. And, if you're trying to convince people to give you thousands and thousands of dollars, you have to make it sound like, oh, you're doing the most amazing possible thing. And I think that doesn't always lead to very succinct, accurate, feasible communication. So I understand why it happens, but it does happen. And I think that this sort of communication can be really helpful, especially when we share it outside the field, to be like, hey, this is what people are actually working on. Hello. Multi-Solutions. I know you've been here before. Buenos dias to you as well. Alexander says, I often scream like that when I sit down to work in the morning anyway. Nothing out of the norm. I feel that. Okay, I think I'm actually filtering most of it, which is good. So first off, from Hengji, I'm sorry, I know I'm saying that wrong. My apologies. Looking at structured input for lots of different languages. So a lot of times people will call text unstructured. There's always structure in valid human-produced linguistic output because language has internal structure, and that's what the field of linguistics is partially about. It's about other things too, but that's a big one, particularly if you're a structuralist, which I am in terms of academic tradition. Sorry, this face is me I'm pretty sure if I went through like my advisor, their advisor, their advisor, their advisor, we'd end up at the Prague school. I'm pretty sure we'd get to Trubetskoy eventually. So very structuralist here, which is my baggage that I'm bringing with me. So looking at structured input for 6,000 plus languages. And structured approaches can be really helpful when you have data paucity, so less data, which is true for most languages. Emily Bender's done a lot of work on this. This is sort of one of her big research projects is in grammar engineering for lower resource languages. Hello, Med, welcome. And then Damar Solario, looking at human level multilinguality. And these are just sort of like overarching ideas about what it is that people think is going to be the next big thing. So most humans, I would say, are multilingual and use multiple languages together in their day-to-day lives. Not necessarily like always code switching, but if you think about like, I'm sure some of you are from India, extremely linguistically diverse place. I don't know that I personally have ever met anyone from India who only speaks one language. And that might be because I don't speak a language from India, so they also know English if they're talking to me. But often, you know, India, Africa, parts of Asia, people will know, 5, 6, 7 languages, and that's just the norm, and everybody does that. So the sort of monolingual existence is honestly pretty weird cross-linguistically and cross globally, around world-aroundly. Yep, and more exposition on that. NLP catered to the 50% of the population that uses more than one language at a time. So I think this is probably particularly focused on code switching when you switch back and forth between languages. David says we have many languages here. Yes, and fun little linguistic topology fact for you is that most of those languages are not related. So let me rephrase that. There are many different language families represented in sort of like India and the Indian subcontinent. So like Tamil is just kind of not that related at all to like Hindi, for example. They are very, very different languages with a lot of grammatical differences. So, good place to do linguistics, and a lot of early linguistics work comes from India and the Sanskrit literary tradition. So particularly like phonology, looking at structures of sounds within languages, arguably started in India. And then Mariela Lapata, stories and why NLP should pay attention to them. New data and architectures for NLP for stories. So really like structure at a narrative level. And I think we have a couple more things as we go through today that are going to be about narrative. Dan Roth, learning to reason over natural language. So this is sort of more on the formal logic side of things, which historically has been very deeply tied to NLP and linguistics. And I would say currently is kind of it's not in vogue, right? Like it's not the thing that people are getting super excited about, particularly on sort of like social media, but definitely still people who are interested in it. And I think it's, very useful. Marco Baroni, unnatural language processing entering the machine-to-machine communication era. So connect existing models to solve new tasks together. Well, I guess the initial models were trained on a language-based task, I suppose, is the example. I am less convinced about the utility of this, just mainly based on my experience with chatbots and a lot of the research that's been done there and sort of the sheer number of dead ends that it looks like arose. Ed Hovey, rediscovering the need for representation and knowledge. So filling the representation gaps in language models. So language models famously ungrounded, knowledge graphs famously extremely grounded and usually constructed by hand. And I imagine this is about synthesis of the two. And then Han Li, a neural symbolic architecture for natural language understanding, joint symbolic logical reasoning, and neural analogical reasoning for NLP. And this sort of analogical reasoning is like stable is to horse as blank is to bird, which I guess could be coop, I guess that could be cage, it could be aviary, it could be roost. Anyway, lots of ways you could fill in that analogy, right? But that sort of structure for reasoning. So anyway, just sort of a little sampling of the different things that 7 different researchers think are going to be the next big thing in NLP. Alexander says, might be a bit of a broad question, but do you have any journal and or conference recommendations for someone interested in linguistics, but with zero background on it? Always found it fascinating. That is a great question. So, I mean, I'd start with a textbook, just because linguistics has a lot of very specific terminology that has a precise meaning. And if you aren't familiar with the precise meaning, you may be very confused by things. Also, particularly if you're interested in sound systems, you're probably going to need to learn the International Phonetic Alphabet to be able to, relate to read basically the alphabet that a lot of the work on sound systems is written in. What is it? Language Files, I think is what it's called, is the textbook out of Ohio State University. Sorry, the Ohio State University here in the US. Pretty good, very, it's got a lot of grounding to sort of like other things in the world, so that's pretty good. The big linguistics conference in the United States is the Linguistic Society of America Conference, which is held in January, usually early January, for second week, when it's cheaper to hold conferences because we are not a rich discipline. And anyone can go to that. You're free to. That's also where they do the Word of the Year voting, so if that's something you're interested in, always a fun time. The American Dialect Society does that. Journals will always be written for other academics, so I don't generally recommend journal articles for introducing a topic, but there are a lot of journals. Sort of the flagship one is Language, which is the LSA's, Linguistic Society of America's journal. Some thoughts. School Live! Good to see you. I'm glad you caught me. Yeah, hopefully that was helpful, Alexander. All right, we're like 10% of the way through. That's okay. I've cleared my schedule for the rest of the day. This is a lot to get through. So speaking of new things, if any of you know Jay Alamar, or I guess don't know Jay Alamar, is he at? I don't know what his current affiliation is. Oh, he's at Cohere. Interesting. Cohere is like an NLP startup. He's done, if you've ever looked at an online explainer about transformers, you've probably run into Jay's work. He does really good like blog posts and visualizations and walkthroughs and things. And this is his explainer about Gatto, which is sort of a very, very multitask tool or model. So DeepMind and Google actually have recently done a lot of models that are like more general. And I am... In general, I need to be very convinced about the utility of this type of model before I would even consider looking into it. But if you're interested, Jay's got a nice explainer. Yeah, you're very welcome, Alexander. Yeah. And then I promised you a little bit more story generation, so here you go. So this is a blog post, actually from a while ago, I guess, but he recently mentioned it again, and I think it's a good blog post, so I thought I'd talk about it, by Mark Riedel? I'm in, I think, a pretty common position of mostly having interacted with a lot of folks online, so I just don't know how their names are said. And they don't put IPA in their Twitter bio, so I gotta guess. And this is, so if you saw the stream on Tuesday about sort of the history of natural language generation broadly before computers, this would be a good place to like pick up and go on to from then. Med says, Gatto was a bit criticized when most started calling it general. Yeah, I think that's also, yes. I think the publicity around it was also not very well thought out. Or, I mean, perhaps very well thought out if the goal was something other than, accurate science communication. Like I said, I understand why people make like big grandiose claims and, hype things up, but I think that it harms our field. I think that it harms people outside our field, and it just makes me disappointed, man. Like, can't can't you just be honest about things and like honest about their benefits and drawbacks and give people like a good understanding of what these tools are good for without hyping them up and, you know, misrepresenting your system's ability? Anyway. And I know it's often not the researchers, it's often like publicity departments that stuff get filtered through, like PR departments from universities sometimes do it as well, but it's disappointing. Anyway, so here's a little Popular Mechanics article from 1931. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but if you're interested, actually I will paste the link for this in YouTube. Just so you can check it out if you'd like, because I don't want to make you have to support me to get the link to this blog post that I'm telling you to go read. Yeah, so I think it's just a really helpful overview of the field and interesting, and always draws in a lot of history. And I think Mark is a really, you know, careful scholar, so appreciate that. And Shafudan asked, and it should be right above your comment. Fabulous, great minds. All right, and then also looking back a little bit, Hardmaru, who is a researcher at Google Brain Tokyo, I'm pretty sure, talked about this, what did I call this? Paper, I guess, that I totally missed. So, Dolly, I've mentioned this before. Oh, one sec. I have a spam comment, and I'm going. I can. Yeah. All right, fabulous. Just deal with that real quick. So, where was I going with this? Right. So DALL-E, which is this, you know, image generation. We're going to talk a lot more about DALL-E today. Image generation trained on image captioning, right? So the task is, you know, given this caption, generate an image, which I'm going to be honest, I have a hard time thinking of a benign use for that's not going to, you know, directly harm someone, but maybe I'm just lacking imagination there. Hardmaru pointed out this 2019 paper that was on a similar program, but on Instagram data. Using public Instagram photos. You will notice that Facebook did this. Facebook owns Instagram. It's all part of Meta. So presumably this was in their terms of use, that this was allowable, but yeah. So some history there. Other people have done the same thing, and it might be done with Instagram again, potentially, question mark. Anyway, more on the image generation thing. So right now there's sort of two models that people are talking about a lot. One is ImageN and the other is DALL-E. I don't have access to either, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't want access to either. And this is, you know, sort of the other one, which is, you know, photorealistic text to image diffusion models with deep language understanding. Here's the project page. And then just here are some examples. So a cute sloth holding a small treasure chest, a bright golden glow is coming from the chest, and here's the generated image. A cute corgi lives in a house made of sushi, here is the image, etc., etc. And then here are some non-cherry-picked images, is the claim, and they're looking at Drawbench, which I believe is the benchmark for drawing images from captions. So looking at the similarity, and then just sort of discussing it in the, I think this is mostly like a helpful, you know, list of links about the types of model. Besides getting people to click on things on Twitter, I really don't understand the proposed value for this type of model that is great enough that it can outweigh potential harms, right? So like, you know, when we started to get a lot of deepfakes back in years ago, there was a lot of discussion about like, well, this is going to harm people. People are going to create, false images or false videos. There's some really upsetting things where people are non-consensually put into adult content that, is generated using their image and has been used to, hurt the people whose image was used non-consensually. Generating violent images for the purposes of harassment, and even like benignly, right? Like, so my channel header, one sec, let me go. All right, so this image, right? Like, that's like a cute little drawing of me. I paid an artist to do that because I think that artists deserve to be paid. And, I don't know that automating art is necessarily a good for the world. I don't know. This type of model just like puts a bad taste in my mouth, just like as a task. And like there's clear harms associated with it. And I know that both Imagen and Wally are only available through API, I believe, and there are restrictions within the API. But as we will talk about, there are, a lot of unknown types of attacks on those types of APIs. And we're just sort of beginning to discover some new ones, which is bad. And they're out there, right? People are already interacting with them. And I'm glad that they have, restricted access to both Imagen and Wally, but like, why? Why did you do this? This was so expensive. This took so much time. Why? I don't know. Sometimes I don't get why people make choices. Santosh says, are all multimodal image generation models using some kind of diffusion way of training? I have no idea. It's not really an area I keep up with super. Mostly I just like see sort of like the downstream effects and I'm like, yeah, why? Jeez. But yeah, no idea. You'd have to ask somebody else. I don't work in computer vision. Med says, we've been thinking about using such models to create synthetic data where data is hard to get, but I get what you're saying. Yeah, and then I guess there's the question of, so that synthetic data, right, is synthetic. Which means that the applicability, and this, I do understand that like synthesizing data and like, data augmentation through like rotation and flips and etc. Is much easier in computer vision than it is in computer language technologies, but it is, you're gonna have artifacts of whatever you use to simulate the data in your trained model, right? You'll get like these second order like ghost effects. I don't know. And maybe that is a good use and maybe that can outweigh the issues. So maybe it can't, Ooh, sorry, that was really loud. It's a sloshy water bottle. Anyway, let's get back to language stuff. Well, believe me, we'll get back to image stuff again. So from Ko Yin, how can we explain language model predictions? And this is, I believe, still a preprint. Yes, so this is still a preprint. Has not been published, but I thought it was really interesting. So this is a paper that looks at contrastive explanations to interpret language models and show that they are A, better aligned with linguistic rules, B, improve model simulatability, and help us characterize how language models make decisions. And I think that last, it's good to have more information. I don't know that that's necessarily like, I think there's a big danger in talking about language models as if they were people, because I think even if people in the field understand that this is just a helpful metaphor, people outside of the field interpret it literally. And that is, yeah. Med says, but isn't that the case when dealing and generating text? Oh yeah, I strongly recommend that you do not generate text data for any any model training, right? Yeah, I would strongly recommend not doing that. And like, if you don't have access to the data in the first place, I think that is a larger problem around, why you are doing this thing. And, how much buy-in you have from the community that you're going to be interacting with and how much time and money you have budgeted for data collection and, quality control. Because in my experience, particularly people who are, newer to working in the industry tend to dramatically under budget for data collection and quality control. All right, so here is an example for GPT-2, which, if you may remember, I believe GPT-2 has been open source, GPT-3 has not. Explanations from the GPT-2 language model. Predictions given the input, can you stop the dog from blank? Input tokens are measured to raise or lower the probability of barking are in red and blue respectively, and those with little influence in white. Non-contrastive explanations such as gradient times input 1 usually attribute the highest saliency to the token immediately preceding prediction. Contrastive explanations giving a more fine-grained and informative explanation on why the model predicted one token over another. So basically this is saying, what is the weight of each of these tokens? Did it increase or decrease the probability of generating barking, right? So can increased, you stop the all decreased, dog had pretty much no effect, and from dramatically increased it. But that sort of pattern would probably be the same whatever word was produced next. So the real question is, why did you say barking instead of walking, for example? And that's what these contrastive explanations are. So here, the model predicted barking instead of crying. So you and the, one sec, let me make sure that I have the raise are red and lower in blue. Okay, I am right. So you and the lowered the probability of barking instead of crying, but can, stop, and dog all raise the probability of barking instead of crying. And for barking instead of walking, you can see that dog didn't have as great of a positive effect, which you'd kind of expect because many things cry, not just dogs, but pretty much only dogs bark in English. Whereas for walking, dogs both bark and walk, so the token of dog is less informative. Is the sort of general intuition you're trying to get here. And then here, the token that's most informative for barking instead of walking is stop, because generally you don't stop dogs from walking, you take them on walks and you want them to walk. Whereas for barking, generally you don't want the dog to bark, is the sort of general intuition there. So interesting paper. I do, I like it when things show linguistic structure because it's something I believe in, as you might notice, because I have many degrees in it. So anyway, preprint, interesting paper. I think it's cool and a good thing to check out if you are interested. And that's by Heyo Yin. All right, and then another research paper. So this one is from Google and I believe is also just a preprint. Yes, and the idea here is dialogue and painting. So Matt actually asks, like, hey, aren't you going to have issues with generated text? And I said yes, and here's an example of generated text that I would be cautious about using. Specifically for training chatbots, right? So this is a project that takes a document and turns it into a dialogue. One sec, I have to wait for the GIF to loop. Okay, so here is a document. It's a Wikipedia article. A section of it is selected, and then it is changed into, oh, sorry, I should have mentioned this is going to be about weight changes, so and food. So if that's something that you are uncomfortable with, I apologize for springing that on you. So it takes that document, separates the sentences, and then generates sentences and then generates dialogue terms that you'd expect to generate each of those sentences. And the sort of thought process on this is like, oh, hey, you can generate a bunch of dialogue data sets for training chatbot systems. To which I say, this example, let me open the paper and see if I can get away from this and find a slightly different example. Yes, please. Yeah. Sorry, I'm looking for an example that's not about weight loss, but I don't know that we're going to get it. Let me check the appendices. Okay, so Here you have an example of their prompts for their crowdsourcing, and then they had ranking within those prompts, various types of qualities that they were rated on. Here we go. Okay, so I'm looking for just like more examples. So here is what the ones are, what the, you know, in theory, the user saying, what is the European school, comma, Munich? Response, the European school, comma, Munich, ESN, is one of 13 European schools and one of 3 in Germany. Supposed question that the person would be answering, what did the European school, Munich, do? Response, first established in 1977, it moved to its current location in Uperlach, maybe, a district in the southeast of Munich in the state of Bavaria in 1981. You may see what my worries about this paper are already, and my worries are that nobody talks like this. This is extremely stilted, this is extremely formal. There are full sentences and like insertions in here. This does not look like dialogue data to me. This looks like narrative, or I guess like nonfiction text that has been slightly rearranged. I'm not saying that it would necessarily ruin a system to use data like this, but I think it would have a very hard time dealing with, people call it noisy user-generated text. I personally would not use this data to train a model that I expected to be able to interact with humans. So that's sort of my point there. Like I said, I generally recommend avoiding generated data, kind of period. I mean, if you care about how things go. All right, and now begins sort of a theme section. So some of y'all may have seen this. And I'm going to start by saying that the discussion here by the authors, I think they would no longer, not necessarily stand behind, but they have made some pretty major edits to the paper. Pre-print. The version that they shared was not done, and unfortunately that's the version that got a lot of traction and excitement around it. And I've talked to, I don't think I've talked to Giannis, but I talked to the other co-author who's his advisor. Med says it seems more like question answering and not dialogue. Sure does. Sure does, yeah. Which is not bad, right? I think it could be pretty helpful for a question answering data set if you wanted that sort of like formal academic style, like maybe for, you know, standardized testing, answering questions on standardized tests in a automated way, which is a pretty popular task. I could see it being useful for that, but certainly not for chatbots. Please don't use that data to build a chatbot. Or if you do, expect that it will not be able to handle what people actually say. Anyway, so, but even though I think that, you know, this was just sort of like a cool thing they found, they overstated it pretty dramatically, have since walked it back. This is the one that got traction, and this is the one that people are talking about, and this is still up, and people are still interacting with it, and the retracted, I wouldn't say retracted, but like the updated version just hasn't gotten as much traction because it's much less clickbaity. And when I mentioned that, like, I think this sort of thing is bad for our field, and I think it's bad for society. So anyway, here it is. So this is student work. Giannis is a student, and the claim is that DALL-E 2 has a secret language. So this is this, you know, image generation given a caption task. And the claim is that apopole Viseriatatis, I guess, means bird, and this other thing means bug or pest. And then if you combine these things, you get, you know, a compositional image from it. So that's the claim. I think this was overstated pretty dramatically, even just looking at these images, right? We don't know if these were, you know, cherry picked or not. I don't have access to DALL-E, so I can't look at these, but there's been a lot of work that people have done since. So like this one in the upper right? Is that the right? I think that's the right. The upper right-hand corner, that does not look like a bug to me. This one, 2 over, again, doesn't look like a bug, looks like seeds. This one below where the bird looking thing is interacting with the catkin, again, doesn't look like a bug. The one, you know, to its left? Left. Also does not look like a bug to me. So even just like looking at these images with this claim, it seems like that's not always the case, right? So it's not a consistent meaning. And I wrote a big, long reply to this, but the actual point of their paper is that sometimes, so if you try to generate text with this model, the text that it generates is not, you know, coherent human language text. It looks kind of like letters. Also, I would probably not have transcribed this the way that they did, right? So this sort of like S-y looking thing looks nothing like the S at the end. I'd probably translate that as like a different letter. It kind of looks like a Cyrillic letter, maybe. Some of these I's have, this E has a diacritic, this I has a diacritic. This first P also kind of looks like Cyrillic to me. Anyway, it's clearly not well-formed English, right? But their claim is that when they took the sum of the text that was generated in the images, when you fed it back into the model, you'd get something that, if you kind of squint at it, looks a little bit related, is the idea. Med says, I saw this and was wondering how they came up with such weird prompts because they seem very specific. So the prompts themselves came from the image, came from a transcription of this. So there's been some, you know, obviously they tried a bunch of things, I think. I mean, they didn't really talk about their whole process in the initial version of the paper. So the sort of the main actual interesting thing that they found is that some, not all, but some of the text that's generated by the model relates to something fairly consistent within the model that appears to potentially relate to the content of the text where it was originally produced, right? So this is, I think this is the one that they say is birds, or this is the one that they say is, yeah, this is the one they say is birds, and they said, you know, it's two farmers talking about vegetables, and then if they put in this word, this token, they get vegetables out, is the sort of claim. It doesn't seem to be super stable. A lot of the, you know, specific effects seem to be token level. So the tokenizer that was used here was a character level tokenizer, and it seems to be just like AP and PO and OP and PL all occur a lot in Latin names of birds. So it doesn't seem to be like that the word itself is stable. It's that the specific like sub tokens seem to be, you know, in a latent space. And an important thing to think about is that every time you put text into this model, you will get images out. So if you put the same text in repeatedly, you're likely to get the same text, similar images out repeatedly, because that's, you know, how the model was trained. That's what it's supposed to do. So it's not shocking that, you know, there was like a lot of consistency within the images. The thing that's kind of surprising is that sometimes it looks like the text that is generated by the model can be fed back in and have something that's sort of related to the content of the image where the subtitles were originally generated, which is a much weaker claim than having a secret language. Which I think the authors would now agree with. And like I talked to them about this and was like, hey, I would, you know, not say that. And I think they no longer would say that. And I do think it like opens up like an interesting potential adversarial attack to this type of model. Anyway, I wrote like a very long thread on this, but the basic gist of it is that, yeah, it's not language. And there was a lot of, you know, more discussion, and, you know, again, it doesn't seem to be super stable. Like the compositional claims don't seem to hold up. You know, not every word seems to be similarly related. So if you look at this thing over here, but on the second, okay, on your screen, it is on the left. Sorry, I'm dyslexic, and like left and right are extremely difficult for me. On your screen, it's on the left. I would say some of those things are arguably potentially vegetables. Some of those things are not vegetables. Like the white yogurt with berries, I would say I would not call a vegetable personally. And sort of like the semantic consistency of the images themselves seems to vary quite a bit. So it's not, you know, there's something there. I don't know how robust it is. Yeah. Mars says left. Thank you, Mars. I appreciate that. And Multi says, it's a very productive day. Thank you. You're very welcome. Like I said, there is, you know, an updated article which has, you know, 87 likes, and the sort of like thread for it had, you know, 56 likes, 560 likes. The original thread continues to have, you know, way more interaction and way more stickiness, and, you know, there's you know, articles have been written about it, and the frustrating thing about this is that you know, this is what somebody outside of the field is going to read, right? And I mean, the answer is no. I forget what the rule is, but there's like a rule that's like, whenever a headline asks a question, the answer is no. I mean, here, yes, the answer is no. There's no secret language. It's just like the secret language of the Facebook reinforcement learning chatbots. It's not. It's just like a weird space in the, you know, in the vectors. But anyway, so I think this is mainly, I think it's kind of a cool finding. I think, again, it does open up a potential set of adversarial attacks that we should know about. I think it was really overstated, and I think it's a really good example of sort of the danger of that, right? And so if we look at, you know, some of the replies to this, some people are very much taking this statement literally, and it's very worrying. I don't know. I understand why, particularly for a student. You want to get your name out there, you want to get hired, you want to be able to, you know, make a mark, which is great, but also it's like this. These are true names. They are not. they are artifacts of specific decisions that were made during the building of the language part of this model, and we just are, you know, kind of misleading people as a field. And I think it kind of happens almost by accident in some cases. I don't know. Anyway, so that's it for the research. I think it was underbaked and very overstated. And I think they, you know, the researchers got excited and thought they found something cool and wanted to tell people about it, and did it in an uncautious way and not a particularly careful scholarly way. And as a result, resulted in a lot of misinformation, or the one that's unintentional. Disinformation? One of them is unintentional, that I think just doesn't hold up to, they don't have evidence that supports this level of strength claims. Mars says, humans used to share their ideas by drawing on stones, caves, and trees, and then written language came. Yeah, I think probably most people would say that spoken language predates written language, but yeah, I mean, we don't know that much about the origin of languages, and we kind of can't, just because it's too far back in time and it didn't leave a lot of traces. The best we can know about is like sort of infer things about manual dexterity, which would be used for sign languages. We can sort of infer things about, you know, the structure of the vocal tract, which, I mean, it doesn't fossilize great, but you can sort of get information about it. So a lot of the reconstructions that have been done of like dinosaur calls have been done with well, they don't have larynxes, and they also don't have the ones that birds have. They have like another thing. But the point being, we can make some inferences about the biological capabilities of humans in the past. We can make some inferences about, you know, their ability to reference things that are not present, about iconicity and their ability to, you know, create symbols that refer to things. We can make some inferences about sort of compositionality, the, you know, ability to represent time, again, based on like things like art, but yeah. Alexander Met says their argument was they didn't want to get this snatched from them by other researchers. Yeah, definitely. I think they didn't want to get scooped. I'm like, I get it, but I wish they hadn't, right? Like, if this had been my advisee, I would not. If it had been my advisee, I would have made a tweet down. But again, you know, people are independent and can do what they want. And Alexander says, the humanization of algorithms is a mental shortcut that even scientists are not immune to, maybe because we work too closely with them. Yeah, and humans like to see the humanity in other things, even when it's not there. And I don't think that's wrong. I think we just need to be very careful in our communication, particularly given, you know, the sheer amount of hype, and also the sort of delicate social situation that we're in right now, right? Like, legislation's coming. Governments are going to make decisions about AI as a field, and are they going to make the decision that like companies using radium, it just shouldn't happen? Or are they going to make the decision that, like, you know, it's like cars and you need, you know, safety regulations, but, you know, people can use them and they can be generally available, even though, you know, there are dangers associated with them. I don't know. Sorry, it's so sloshy. Maybe I should just finish my coffee and then put my water in the coffee cup. That would be better. Anyway, speaking of that, ethics. Also, I don't know if any of you also use Ecosia, but they did a redesign. I think it looks really good. Great search engine, highly recommend it. All right, so first up from Meta, which you may know as Facebook. They have a fairness in AI research group. They've, you know, I would say have also done a lot of harm as a company, particularly in automated processes, and also in not automated processes. I think we're going to talk about them a little bit more when it comes to crowdsourcing and ethics in just a little bit. But they have some new research data sets that they are open sourcing. And they are looking at reducing demographic biases in text, which can help break stereotypical associations present in NLP data. The method is a demographic text perturber. My apologies to anyone who speaks an aerotic language. I am very sorry for you. Introduces demographically diverse variations that are otherwise similar to the original text. For example, it might take the sentence, he likes his grandma, and create alternatives such as he likes her grandma, they like their grandma, to augment the data set with parallel demographically altered variants. So basically, they're doing data augmentation to reduce biases around pronouns. Yep, and then they looked at a bunch of different things. So ability, age, body type. That's a little bit small. Let me zoom in for you. Ability, age, body type, characteristics, cultural, I don't know what they mean by that, gender, sex, nationality, nonce. Nonce just means like nonsense. So if you generate tokens that are not words for an experimental task, those would be nonce tokens. Political ideologies, race and ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic class. Don't love political ideology being included as a type of demographic characteristic, because unlike some of these things, those can just change. I don't know. Anyway, they did it. And then some other examples. And then they're doing data augmentation with like slot filling to produce more data. So they did that. I've talked about this before in other places, which you may or may not have run across, but I think this like debiasing text is not that important in terms of, you know, models in general, and what's much more effective is trying to avoid building harmful projects in the first place. But I also wouldn't expect Facebook to get on board with it. So next up, Mar says, IT is awesome. I love it. Technology is good. I realize that I'm a little bit of a Debbie Downer about some things, but I really believe in and benefit from language technology, and I want it to be good and help people, and I care a lot, gosh darn it. I care so much. And I would love to be in a boring field where I can just talk about like tokenizers all day, but unfortunately, it's not boring right now. Exciting times, as the curse goes. We're not even halfway through. I warned you, this was going to be a long one. Anyway, another fairness paper. So this is from ACL. Andre says, political ideology regarding the Ukraine question. Oh, is that what they were looking at? Interesting. So this is another paper on the intrinsic and extrinsic fairness evaluation metrics from contextualized language representations. Also, sorry, I'm just going to go back to that for a second. There's also been quite a bit of work done that's shown that when, you know, and I think this is across countries as well, I don't think this is just within the US, that when, you know, political ideology is considered for things like content moderation, far right, or, you know, very, so it would be reactionary, speech tends to get amplified, and, you know, far left, or I don't remember. Gonna dust off some civics here, but very far left speech tends to get censored. Well, not necessarily censored, but like down weighted, just like shared less. And that, you know, if you are considering political ideology as like a protected class, you tend to protect a lot of hate speech from people on the far right, which I personally think is a bad thing, because I don't think that hate speech should be amplified, but I guess that's my stance on that. Hi, Oligard. Welcome, welcome. Mar says Ecosia. Oh, yeah. I love Ecosia. And they've gotten better in terms of search result quality. They use Bing, by the way, as like the back end. So. I also like really appreciate their commitment to openness in all sides of the company. Second paper. And I can dig up some citations for that far right application if you're interested. Ping me on Twitter and I'll do it. Multiple metrics have been introduced to measure fairness in various natural language processing tasks. These metrics can be categorized into two categories: extrinsic metrics for evaluating fairness in downstream applications, and intrinsic metrics for estimating fairness in upstream contextualized language representation models. Basically, so are the embeddings biased, or does bias in the embeddings actually end up hurting the people who use the system? In this paper, we conduct an extensive correlation study between intrinsic and extrinsic metrics across bias notions using 19 contextualized language models. So it's like a large language model sort of thing. We find that intrinsic and extrinsic metrics do not necessarily correlate in their original setting, even when corrected for metrics misalignments, noise and evaluation datasets, and confounding factors such as experiment configuration for extrinsic metrics. So just because there is, you know, a biased relationship in, let's say, your word embedding space, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be, you know, harm in the downstream model. Which, like I mentioned, I care more about harming the downstream model than I do about, you know, some degree of bias in the model. It's in the, you know, in the word embeddings. No one's touching the word embeddings directly. But that's what the Facebook team worked on. You may get the sense that I'm a little bit critical of Facebook, and you'd be right. Oh, Andre says, please fix video description. Mastodon should be Mastodon. Oh, thank you. Can I do that right now while we're live? I shouldn't risk it. I'm not going to do it while I'm live, but I am going to make myself a little note to do it afterwards. Like I mentioned, I am dyslexic, and my bane of my gosh darn existence is schwas. So schwas are the vowel in English that goes and we can represent it with any letter. Well, any vowel letter. And some non-vowel letters. It's rough. It's rough out here for English writers. All right. And then, speaking of bias evaluation, in multilingual settings. So I realize this is still sort of research, but it's under a subcategory. This is another ACL paper, and Zavika's the first author who I was researcher, really just like as a person. So that's not why I'm talking about this research. It's just like a side note. Evaluating bias, fairness, and social impact in monolingual language models is a difficult task. This challenge is further compounded when language modeling occurs in a multilingual context. So as we talked about, most people on Earth exist in a multilingual context. Considering the implication of evaluation biases for large multilingual language models, we situate the discussion of bias evaluation within a wider context of social scientific research with computational work. We highlight 3 dimensions of developing multilingual bias evaluation frameworks. 1, increasing transparency through documentation. 2, expanding targets of bias beyond gender. And 3, addressing cultural differences that exist between languages. We further discuss the power dynamics and consequences of training large language models and recommend that researchers remain cognizant of the ramifications of developing such technologies. So I think it's just overall chock full of good advice. Think things through, tell people what you've done. Gender is, listen, I know that a lot of sort of my probably best known and most cited work is on gender bias in speech technology. I personally, in the US context, much more concerned about racial bias. Much more concerned about racial bias. And, you know, in other contexts, there are, you know, other things that are also very relevant. So people get really excited about the gender bias. They love to talk about it. I don't think it's like completely unimportant. I just think that other things are more pressing and we should deal with them first. Yeah. So yeah, good paper. Check it out. If you're working in a multilingual setting, which I'm sure many of you are, should have some good guidelines and recommendations. Oh, this one. This was good, but a little bit surprising to me, and I hope they can pull it off. The ACL is, I want to say it was founded in the US. I'm pretty sure it was. In a little bit. I'm pretty sure it was founded in the US, and sort of an interesting thing about the history of computational linguistics, certainly in the US, is that it was very tied, much like a lot of early computer science research, to the Department of Defense, and, you know, imperialism kind of directly. So anyway, so I think it makes sense that, you know, the needs of people around the world were not really considered as much in the, you know, creation of this organization, but they should be, and it's important. And not everyone lives in the US, and not everyone wants to live in the US. I don't know. I do know. Many people have many experiences, and focusing on only a few of them with technology is bad for people and bad for the technology. Mars says, is AI ethics a non-technical research area? I'd say no, because I would say that it is very technical. I'm assuming your phrasing makes me think that it's like, do people write code in this research? And the answer is yes. So again, like me personally, I think that the most impactful ethical decisions happen more at the product development side of things, the company creation side of things, than like super nitty gritty, okay, we're building a model, how can we make it better? Those are important, but, you know, it's far better not to build the puppy kicker than to fine tune the puppy kicker so that it kicks less puppies. You know what I mean? I use puppy kicking as an example of something that, you know, is universally considered bad. Yeah. So this is sort of, you know, focus that the ACL as an organization is going to have. So what they would really like to have is 60 languages, human languages, included for the 60th ACL anniversary. And then there's sort of like a workflow of how they're going to do that. And I should clarify, this is the conference itself should be available in these languages, right? So anyone who spoke one of these languages would be able to interact with the content. So speech, the text, the terminology curation to help people interact with the technical content, sign language interpretation, and then a web case. And the sort of the goals for the next couple of years are to have a complete translation of the entire anthology in 60 languages. And the anthology has papers going back to the 60s to today, right? Any paper that's been published at an ACL venue is in the anthology. I've got some stuff in the anthology. Having comprehensive standardized scientific and computational linguistic terminology with contextualized examples in 60 languages. Have a capability to have live cross-lingual closed captioning and dubbing into 60. Or is that too much to ask? We can negotiate languages. Comprehensive repo for all the talks and from the video from the community, etc., etc. So this is sort of a goal that they would like to have, that they're working on. There's a mailing list if you'd like to join. And then some additional information. So yeah, I think this is fantastic. I often talk about how English is cool. I mean, it's my native language, lucky me. But most people don't speak English, and this should really make language technology research much more available. So, great initiative. 10 out of 10. I don't know that I can help much. My best languages after English are American Sign Language, which I think they have more than covered, and my French is bad. So, other things. So, Mozilla, the Mozilla Foundation, has a working groups call. It's an opportunity, if you're interested, for working on trustworthy AI. And they want to work with expert AI builders alongside highly engaged civil society actors in envisioning a more equitable and automated future. And if you are interested, you can propose a project. So if this is something that appeals to you and you want to work on a project, reach out. So a good opportunity. Okay, and it needs to be done by Thursday, June 30th, which means you have 3 weeks. Get on it if this is something that you're interested in. And then also speaking about, so this is from Bonaventure Dosso. Sorry for saying that wrong if I did. And this is, where are the authors at the ACL in Dublin from? And as you can see, the map is like the global north, pretty much. So lots of folks from the US, lots of folks from China, Oceania, Africa and South America, stunningly underrepresented, which is, there are great researchers there, and I would love to see them be able to present their work more widely. Anyway, and I should say these are just first authors, so I'm not saying that there are not researchers from there. It's just that they weren't the first author, which is sort of the most prestigious position, and the assumption is that the first author led the project and it was their main idea, unless it says elsewise in the notes in the paper itself. All right. So I mentioned some of the issues that I mentioned. I said a while ago we'd be talking about outsourcing and ethics. Ooh, I got there. I got there eventually. So this is a discussion about moderation. So this content, everything in moderation, talks about content moderation and sort of the ethics of outsourcing moderation to Kenya. So, yeah, and I'm not going to go too far into it. It's kind of upsetting, but yeah. On the one hand, I think automated moderation has the potential to save moderators a lot of harm, psychological harm. On the other hand, it has the potential to harm content creators and producers, people who are producing content. And on the third hand, maybe we shouldn't be building platforms that are so big that we can't moderate the content, potentially. Andre says, what would you might say about language families like Slavic, Arabic, Turkish? They're cool. Yeah, I don't know that much about Slavic. One of the professors in my PhD program was a Slavic linguist. A lot of cases, very grammatically rich. Yeah, I think they're all deserving of just as much love and attention as English. Okay, taking a little break from my voice. It's going okay. I think I might be a little bit hoarse at the end of this. We are halfway through, by the way. I have a lot to talk about. All right, and this is not specifically NLP. It's sort of more machine learning, but I think it's good to know about, specifically especially since people are working more on cross-modal stuff. Mar says every week one language is dying. So language diversity and the loss of a language is, I mean, people in linguistics will often talk about it as like, oh, you know, it's so sad for us linguists because we aren't going to get that data. But I think that's not everyone, but that's sort of like a common theme that you'll hear. And I think that's like, you know, a little bit, a little bit colonialist, because it's, you know, people are losing their connection to their history and their ancestors and their community and that link to the past. And I think that that's very, very sad, right? Like, I had so my family is of Celtic descent mostly, and we don't speak any Celtic languages, right? So my great grandma, maybe one more great, would have spoken Cornish. She just didn't pass it down. None of us speak Cornish. And I want to say it's actually probably not doing well as well as languages go, right? And it would be, you know, nice, but we don't. Yeah. Yeah, Andre is just like clarifying about some of the Slavic languages, Bulgarian, Ukrainian, Russian, Polish, yeah. Again, very grammatically rich languages. Often we talk about like having lots of grammar as being like money. So you'll say like grammatically rich and grammatically impoverished. English is pretty grammatically impoverished. We don't have like a lot of cases. We don't have grammatical gender, for example. Tiny bit, tiny bit. We have like the remnants, some crumbs, because we used to have it because we're Germanic, but no more. Shafuden says, is the outsourced moderation model akin to the photomation industry, Amazon's Mechanical Turk, etc.? Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's, you know, a big part of the ethics of AI systems is that they rely on a lot of language, well, a lot of data. Language systems rely on language data. And a lot of times that data is created by very poorly paid workers. And without their, you know, human annotations, the systems just wouldn't work. And it's done at huge scale. So yeah, and moderation is done much the same way, except instead of, you know, doing kind of a boring task that you're underpaid for, you are looking at some of the most horrible things that humans can say and do. And it fucks people up, man. It's bad. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I've done, you know, I'm not a community manager, but I've done a lot of work within smaller communities, and it's the power and the promise and also the danger of computers is in scale and making things faster and bigger and more. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's very much not. And we don't really have a good social way to deal with that yet. And I'm sure we will. I just hope it's in a way that is to the benefit of everybody. Yeah. Andre says we use Cyrillic. Yeah. Although not all languages that use Cyrillic are Slavic, so that's a good thing to watch out for. Like Mongolian, decidedly not Slavic. Very different. Might actually be more closely related to Turkish. Don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I took typology. Anyway, just some new research from Judy Gichoya, who is a fantastic radiologist who's, you know, basically learned machine learning to produce more knowledge about automating things in radiology and medical imaging more generally. Really good work if you're into medical imaging. I'd recommend following her. But there is a pretty big problem with a lot of medical imaging in that there's sort of this leakage problem. So variables that should not be important to the outcome are being picked up by the model. Things like race, right, are being picked up from these images. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it is, you know, that there's something biological in it. It could be, let's say, you know, one hospital uses a specific imager, another hospital uses a different imager. The demographics of the people who go to those hospitals are very different, and as a result, being one imager is associated with the demographics of one population and the other imager is associated with the demographics of the other population. But this can be, you know, a pretty big problem because if you're familiar with the US medical system, there are quite a lot of disparities between different racial groups, often to the detriment of non-white people, as many things in the history of the country have been. So as she says, the real danger is the potential for reinforcing race-based disparities in the quality of care patients receive. In radiology, when we are looking at x-rays and MRIs to determine the presence or absence of disease or injury, a patient's race is not relevant to that task. We call this being race diagnostic. We don't know, and we don't need to know someone's race to detect a cancerous tumor in a CT or a bone fracture in an x-ray. But there is this leakage, this sort of like weirdness that's happening in these models, presumably as a result of the underlying data sets themselves, and that's an issue. And I think that there was a really good quote that I liked in this article. There's no simple solution to fixing bias in machine learning. The worst thing you can do is try to simplify a complex problem, which I think is a fabulous point. Anyway, so just more information about radiology and bias in medical imaging. Alexander says a lot of Gaelic or Gaelic, I guess it's true of both, languages are dead-ish. Most of us in the central belt of Scotland only know English. It's a shame. Yeah, another language that my ancestors spoke that we don't anymore. Yeah, it is a shame. On the other hand, I have tried to learn Gaelic languages as a second language, and it went very poorly. I also don't really have anyone who's a speaker to speak it to. So if you're trying to learn a language, it's usually, if you are successful, it's because you have someone to speak or use, I should not say, just speak the language with. And if you don't have that, you kind of don't learn it. Yeah. And Andre talking about the grammar of different languages, Serbian, North Macedonian, Belarusian. Yeah, there's a lot of language diversity in Europe, but there aren't as many families as there are in like India. All right, and then Emily Bender, who you may know of from various things. She's a co-author on the Stochastic Parrots paper, was also on the faculty when I was at the University of Washington. She was not my advisor. She was not on my committee, but we sort of know each other. Put together a bingo card so bingo is an American, I don't know if it's American. It's common in America. Basically, it's a game where there's sort of like a random number generator, and then you have a card with a bunch of numbers, and they pick out numbers, and you complete the boxes, and you get like things in a row or a square, or not usually a square, but like a row or a column. You yell bingo, and you win the prize. So bingo cards are like things that you should like see pretty commonly to fill out the card and then get the prize. And in this case, I think it's satirical. There is no prize for people trying to avoid thinking about ethics. So just some common things that people say. If I don't, someone else will. Who are you to decide? Ethics is relative to culture. There are positive uses too. Ethics review is censorship. Science is neutral. Well, you flew to this conference. So when talking about like ecological impacts, people are biased too. Negative outcomes are not predictable. Workers there are happy for 5 cents. So I'm sure that this is about outsourcing and crowdsourcing. There are no alternatives. Don't slow down progress. You want to go back to candles. Ethics review is US imperialism. The data was publicly accessible. I see this one a lot. And then stop being political. So just some things that people commonly say that are sort of basically excuses to not think about or consider ethics, or do what they want to do, even if perhaps they know that it is not the best for the world for them to do that thing. Yeah. Oh, so it's by Emily Bender and also Karen Fort? I don't know. There's a diaretic. Sorry, it's a little bit out of the screen. There's a diaretic over the E, and I don't know how that changes the pronunciation. So sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Karen. Carrie? Could be a length marker. She's French. Catherine, perhaps? Yeah. Anyway, just some things that might come up. Little joke. Speaking of conferences, oh, it looks like I'm in the page. Let's move on the side. RightsCon is currently ongoing. So this is a summit on digital rights. A lot of folks that I follow in sort of like the rights and privacy space are speaking there. So lots of public sections to check out. If you're interested, check it out. It's rightscon.org. Oh, thank you, Wired. Oh my gosh. And then this was a really interesting article on So this was wired as a popular science article, and this draws together a bunch of research threads about ways to obfuscate your voice. So if you have, a smart speaker, or somebody in the space that you're in has a smart speaker, or if you have a phone that you can wake with a wake word, voices are biometric data, which means that your voice can be used to identify you as an individual. So in a research setting, that would be considered more sensitive because it's impossible to anonymize a voice without changing the acoustic characteristics of the voice, which doesn't work for linguistics papers. But if you ever watch a news report with an anonymous person, they're backlit, and the voice is distorted to sound weird. Sorry, what I said was, and the voice is distorted to sound weird. That's to anonymize the person, because if you just use their voice, you'd know it was them. So this is a sort of review article of different ways to obfuscate your voice, right? So that it's not clear that it is you that is speaking. Potentially very helpful. And then this is the final one in the ethics section. So this is from the Big Science Workshop. And I'll say with the thing, and then I'll say something else. So this was a paper for a language model of Arabic, so a large Arabic language model, that the carbon dioxide cost of generating 3 billion tokens is equivalent to the cost of training a 13 billion token model, including research and travel. For comparison, GPT some time ago reported 4.5 billion generated words per day. I will say that the estimates are pretty much the worst case scenario. So in most cases, the cost of producing tokens is going to be less than this relative to the cost of training the model, but still pretty expensive. And I think this is something that often you do not hear about, particularly from labs that have compute to spare, is the cost of running inference on the models, particularly in terms of CO2. So I think it's good to think about. I'm happy to see research where people are talking about it, but I think this is a little bit overstated in how bad it is. But I mean, you can't always assume the best case scenario, right? So I think it is helpful to think about the worst case scenario in terms of carbon emissions. All right, politics, into it. And I just got a couple of things here, and then I have some little palate cleansers at the end. I don't think today is going to be too bad, but so first of all, Clearview Ai. So if you're unfamiliar with Clearview Ai, they are a commercial face recognition technology company, and they have been trained with your data, yes, almost certainly yours, scraped potentially illegally from public websites, right? So if you go back to the ethics bingo card, right? The data was publicly accessible. We ignored the terms of service of the companies that were hosting the data, and also the copyright holders of the copyrighted images. All images are protected by copyright, certainly in the United States, and used it anyway. And here, the ICO has fined Clearview Ai $7.5 million for illegally scraping images. I believe that this might only apply to people in the UK. Yes. They also ordered the company to delete all UK citizens' photos. I wrote to the ICO in February 2020, urging them to investigate. This enforcement is welcome but complex. So basically it was wrong that they did it, and now there are consequences, which is nice. My reading, so this is just sort of discussion from, I believe she is a... sorry, I'm just going to read the bio. You can see that. Director at Big Brother Watch, Human Rights and Technology, Animal Lover, etc., etc. My view is that the ICO's action effectively stops Clearview from operating in the UK. This may be the only way the company can attempt to evade the legal requirement to delete UK images, which they may seek to do, and there is no obvious way that they can comprehensively comply. Right, so there's no way for them to look at an image of a person and be like, this is a UK citizen, I've got to delete it. Note that the $7.5 million fine is down from the ICO's provisional fine of $17 million in December. We'll have to wait for further details in the penalty notice. The bigger picture is that facial recognition is wildly out of control, and Parliament is doing absolutely nothing. So this is in the UK. Parliament is their elected body. Facial recognition has the potential to eradicate anonymity as we know it, decimate privacy rights, and make detailed records of our lives available to the highest bidder. So I believe in the US, in Michigan, there are limits about who can buy data from Clearview Ai, but certainly for a while, certainly in the US, they were selling it to basically anybody. Clearview was used 170 times by the Met Police, in addition to banking firms and even a university. 2 police forces are using live facial recognition on our streets, now requiring tech for retrospective facial recognition, with total opacity over how many photos they amassed from this or from where. Police are writing these policies. Parliament is nowhere to be seen. Today's news should be a nail on the coffin for facial recognition, but it's regulation of the last resort. The situation is out of control. Parliament should urgently debate facial recognition surveillance and impose an urgent ban. So again, this is in the UK. It doesn't affect anybody anywhere else, except, of course, that Clearview Ai has less money, which is something that I'm a fan of. And yeah, good news, right? It could be better, but it's at least something good. Yes. And then this is an opinion about the World Economic Forum. And I think this is from May, so it's definitely past, but there's an op-ed that basically suggests that, hey, we should shut down spyware as an industry. I would also love for that to happen. So this is things like, basically anything to collect surveillance data on people. Andre says, the International Phonetic Alphabet. Interesting article in Wikipedia. Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned that if you were going to read linguistic journals, that might be something that would be helpful for you to learn. I also have, it's downstairs, I have a book chapter that sort of introduces the concept of phonetics book is called Variation in Dialects in NLP. It's not called that. I don't remember what the book is called, but if you don't want to learn IPA and you do want to learn a little bit about phonetics, that might be a good resource. Also in politics, so this is about a court case here in the United States, where basically the judge used basically a search term and a corpus to determine what consisted sanitation. So it is very legal. Basically, like, could we in the United States have a federal level, so for all the states, mandate for wearing masks in public places to prevent the spread of airborne respiratory diseases? And this, lower level court decision meant that basically we couldn't. And it was using a corpora, and it seems to be common and growing. So when I mentioned that, when we're communicating externally about things in the field, we have to consider not just other people in the field, but also other stakeholders who aren't going to have that same background and that same knowledge. The legal system is a big one of that, right? Like, judges are an audience that we have, whether or not we know it. And I think it's, important to consider how our words and our ideas and the things that we build exist in a larger social context. And then, actually, are these all on ADPA? No. Okay. So I only have one thing on ADPPA. So this is the American Data Privacy Protection Act. I think it's draft legislation. It has nowhere near being passed. So in Europe, they have GDPR. There's going to be the Digital Services Act coming out soon. In the US, we don't have, it's sort of up in the air whether or not we have a right to privacy, period, just as citizens. But this act is to protect online privacy, basically, or data privacy, period. The only real sort of data privacy protections we have in the US are for students with their educational data through HIPAA, and then health data when it is, shared with your health services provider for HIPAA. It's for HIPAA. HIPAA. There's a sort of common misconception that people have that HIPAA means that all of their health data is protected, but if they are not talking to a health provider, it's not, right? So if I did an online quiz that's like, I have these health conditions, whoever's hosting the online quiz could absolutely sell that data to an insurer, and my rates could change as an effect, just as an example. Akshay, hello, welcome back, good to see you. All right. So looking at the draft of this bill, I don't even think it's out of committee yet. This is a discussion from Jolynn Dellinger, who's a privacy law expert. And I believe she's at UNC. So looking at, in this draft legislation, the role of data brokers. So if you're unfamiliar, data brokers are, let's say I am a company and I want to know, I need information on all the dog owners in, Durham, North Carolina. Give me that list. You could probably buy that, right? They are very underregulated. They can sell data to pretty much anyone, including the federal government. And a big problem recently has been that, so US, you have legal protections about how law enforcement can ask you for your information, but they can ask other people for that information, and there are fewer protections around that. So law enforcement agencies have been sort of like doing an end run around people's rights by, that's a football metaphor, have been getting around these legal protections that people have by buying their data from data brokers, for example. So I know there's been some issues with the FBI doing that. Would data be protected if this new draft legislation was passed? Big if. Would we be protected from data brokers? And the answer is no. So the only requirements are registry, the ability to audit, and eventually opt out. And I believe that these would be on the individual havers of data to do. The burden is still on the consumer to figure out that these companies exist, what they do, why it's a problem, and do something about it. In my experience, most people in the US don't know about data brokers, even though those data brokers have and are currently selling their data. But a third-party collecting entity is a subset of covered entities, so presumably subject to data minimization and prohibited practices in Section 101 and 102, and sensitive to data RT to consent under 204A. I'm assuming that RT there is right to consent. So something to keep an eye on, draft legislation, we'll see where it goes. And then I think Jolynn is a really good person to follow if you're interested in data privacy law in the US. Legal things are always super country specific. So I try to sample from different countries, but I live in the US, so I care about it. All right. Also, sort of like thinking about legal things. So this is about GDPR, which is the General Data Privacy Regulation. Some of those letters are probably wrong when I said what they were. But this is the Data Privacy Protection Act that affects EU citizens. So not the UK now, but the rest of the EU. Well, the UK is no longer in the EU. And Abiba Burhan, who we talk about a lot on this channel, big fans, great researcher, love her work. I think she's doing super important stuff. Was sort of basically trying to figure out, okay, so GDPR covers face data, specifically around, and we use those to train systems. And by we, I mean people who work with computer vision and facial recognition, which is not me, something I would not choose to work on. And sort of her understanding at this point, again, not a lawyer, is that creating an image data set with images of people make you a data processor. As a data processor, even under research purposes, you need to be clear about what you're doing with data, why, and need to let people know you got your data. So this is very different from sort of the US model that's sort of coming into focus, where individuals are responsible for going to the companies and the companies have to go to the individuals. And her supposition here is that means that because most data set processors did not do that, it is illegal to use those. So sort of understanding based on this discussion here, again, a lot of people who aren't lawyers, so salt, could be the case, but it hasn't been challenged in court. So until it's challenged in court, we just sort of don't know what the legal ramifications of that are. So question mark, is all facial recognition illegal in Europe? Who knows? Maybe. So assuming I'm right, the whole field of machine learning and AI, since it's built on the backbone of large-scale data sets sourced mostly from the World Wide Web without people's consent or awareness, is built on illegal data practices. But yeah, maybe. Basically, like I mentioned, we're in a very not just malleable, but what's the word I'm looking for here? We're at a very delicate time right now in terms of where our field sits in society. And I think a lot of people are making unwise decisions that are putting people at risk. And the result of that is going to be that the field is severely curtailed, and I don't think that that's a bad thing, given that looks like we can't, unfortunately, you can't trust everybody to do machine learning and, large-scale data processing in a way that's beneficial to society as a whole. Speaking of which, Clearview Ai again. So this is a different story. And this is just sort of a discussion about, so this was in time. It's just sort of a discussion about the company and like what the issues is and getting the word out there. And then sort of the stance is that if the training data is illegitimately connected, not only should you have to delete it, but you should delete models that were built on it. There is sort of increasing legal precedent for this, so this may be something that comes to pass. Which means, just for us thinking ahead as technologists, looking into the future, into our crystal balls, being like, what should we do next? I would maybe, if I were future-proofing, say, a product that I were building, I would train that product on data that I know that I had explicit legal right to use for that purpose. So something that I had collected purpose for that project, where there was a clear chain of like transfer of the data, and where I had consent from everybody whose data was used. And that's what I do, given sort of what like looking at the clouds on the legislative horizon. But I'm not everybody. Y'all are free to do what you want. That's my recommendation though. Reminder says, most researchers don't make videos on YouTube. Some of them do. Some of them don't. And I would say I'm not, at one point in time, I was predominantly a researcher. These days, I'd say I'm more of an educator. I'm not actively looking to publish research just at the moment. All right, finally, miscellaneous. Full palate cleanser. Bring the mood up. But yeah, I would be pretty wary of using a lot of large language models in your work, and especially, building things on top of large language models. Just, just be wary. Coffee. Okay. So this was from actually an NLT faculty member, speaking of being an educator, and I just thought it was a cool idea, so I'm going to share it. And the idea is, this was for an NLP class at the college level. I don't think this was I think this was an undergraduate, not, like a master's or a PhD program, I think. And the projects they did were they came up with a new task, and, they created the data, guidelines, data sheets, did all the documentation, and then gave it to another group to reproduce the work, and then build a model to predict it. So I think overall, really cool idea. I think it's really good to give students experience with data curation and annotation and collection. And as I mentioned earlier in the stream, I think that's something that the vast majority of newer people in the field underestimate the burden of, particularly if you're coming from a research background where like you're working on an established task and, oh, there's the data set, I'll just use the data set. That's pretty rare to encounter in industry. And it sounds like it went really, really great. Lots of cool ideas, lots of practical experience for the students, sort of got their cogs turned in terms of thinking about like, how can you apply these tools? And then there's a nice little landing page for, oh wow, a little bit hard to read. There's a nice little landing page for all of the different projects that they worked on, so that the different students can show off their work. So I think cool idea, really like it, very practical, hands-on, 10 out of 10, probably something I would do if I were teaching at the collegiate level. All right. And then I thought there was another really good discussion here. So Jeremy Howard, I believe, is the spouse of Rachel Thomas. I said that last time and I didn't check it, but I'm pretty sure. And together they run Fast AI, which is like a really good, I recommend it. It's a machine learning, deep learning training course online. And Jeremy tweeted from the Google Machine Learning Guide this point, that it is good to choose a machine learning over a complex heuristic. A simple heuristic can get your product out the door. A complex heuristic is unmaintainable. Once you have data and a basic idea of what you're trying to accomplish, move on to machine learning. As in most software engineering tasks, you will have to be constantly updating your approach, whether it is a heuristic or a machine learned model, and you will find that a machine learned model is easier to update and maintain. So basically what they're saying is don't build a lot of complex rules by hand. And I would say in general overall, that would also be my recommendation. In general overall, but there are some cases where you do want a lot of complex hand-built stuff. And that was Dr. Kat Hicks' point, and they are at Plural Site, and the point is that I find things like this very unhelpful, actually, so long as they continue to not define complex or a basic idea. Speaking as someone who's frequently told, oh, using domain matter expertise in our delineation of measures and incorporating previous research evidence in how we measured this thing is too complex. So I think that's a really good point, because the sort of idea of complexity here is sort of predicated on the idea that if you are a machine learning person, you will understand this right away, and not necessarily that it's what makes sense given the data at hand. Right, so a good example of that would be something like socioeconomic status, which as a social variable. So it is notoriously difficult to measure and complicated, but can be really helpful for, especially language-related tasks. So in general, people who are, working class tend to have stronger regional dialects than people who are professional class, for example. So usually in my YouTube videos, I'm using my college my college educated sound and sort of voice. Whereas, a lot of the folks from around here, if I'm talking to them and they aren't in that sort of career, probably wouldn't have that sort of sound to their voice, if that makes sense. I don't know. That was a little vague. Andre says, do you work in ASCII or Unicode letter space? Mainly Unicode. Yes, I would always recommend that you work in Unicode if you have the option. And in fact, I actually have, it might come up if I do this. Let's see. Are you sure about that? I have a whole talk, there we go, about why you should use Unicode. Yeah, it was at the Puget Sound Python meeting. 2018. Time continues to move forward. Yeah, so just in general, Unicode, please, everybody, listen to me. Use Unicode. Do not use ASCII. You will thank yourself for it in the future. All right. And then this is the website for an NLP consultancy called Mantis. And I just happened to really like the sort of like We Believe section. So yeah, I'll just read through these because I think it's good points that I agree with. So 1, experiments should be easily reproducible. This encourages more trust in the results, enables better collaboration within a team, and reduces duplication of work, which I agree. And that also means that it shouldn't use like an insane amount of, sorry, I shouldn't say that. It also means that you shouldn't use a unsustainable amount of compute for a small team, right? Like if I do something and I want you to reproduce it, I'm not going to use tools you don't have, right? Like if I have, the fanciest, most well-stocked kitchen and I have 18 specialist pans, but I know you have like 1 4-quart saucepan, I'm going to use a 4-quart saucepan so you can make the same recipe, right? Great point. Really appreciate it. Data reflects human biases, AI, and as an extension, natural language processing. I don't love AI being a superset of natural language processing, but I'll let that slide. Applications mimic these biases and can cause unintended harm. I would actually say not just mimic, but embiggen. What's the word? Exacerbate? Amplify. Detecting and reducing ethical risks is the responsibility of all data scientists. Yes, I would strongly agree with that. AI and NLP are not a neutral technology. Applying natural language processing tools for military, political, or marketing purposes has an impact on our democracy and free will. We think carefully about the impact of our work, that our work might have, and are selective about the industries and clients we work with, which I really appreciate. I think, that's something everyone should think about. Like, what do you want your labor to support? What are you not willing to use your labor to support? Open source software and practices have made, among other things, the AI revolution possible. They accelerate progress and encourage collaboration between people and organizations. We use open source by default and contribute to the open source community where possible. Andre said, we had a transition from KOI 8R 8-bit to UTF-8 Unicode encoding for Linux distribution 10 years ago. Sorry for my English. Your English is fabulous. Significantly better than my Slavic languages as a whole. Yeah. Transitioning to Unicode. Great. Strongly support it. Yeah, and if y'all are starting projects, please start them with Unicode. You will be a happy camper in the future if you do that. And then finally, it's our responsibility to combat climate change to support a more sustainable way of life. Training large deep learning models for natural language processing tasks can have enormous carbon footprints, so we avoid such models where possible and use computing resources responsibly and efficiently. Rachel approved. Great points. I don't know if any of you were at, I think it was online, the ACL 2020, maybe? I don't remember. Anyway, I gave a talk on sort of like the ethics of what I won't build. And one of the things that I said is that it's really helpful if you think about what it is you won't build and what your ethical principles are for your work before it becomes an issue. So I think they've done that. Good job. I appreciate it. Sorry, I know that was a little bit loud. Oh, also, did you see my earrings? Oh, that does not show up well against my skin tone. I don't know how that works. I made them. Yes, Andre says Python 2 is not Unicode, rather use Python 3. Yes, Python 3, UTF-8, match made in heaven. If you were able, Python 3 would be my recommendation for anyone, particularly if you're starting something. It's much easier if you do it when you're starting. All right, so this one is a little bit like, eye rolly. So this is by Greg M. Epstein. It's a thread of the most grandiose, religious-sounding tech quotes I can find. Send suggestions. So this is just the stuff that people have said, which is like off the wall. So one from Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google. AI is one of the most important things humanity is working on. Okay, it is more profound than, I don't know, electricity or fire. I disagree strongly. The great unfinished tasks of a modern world is to turn death from a fact of life into a problem to be solved, a problem towards whose solution I hope to contribute in whatever way I can. Peter Thiel. Yep. Rachel, that sounds literally like something a villain would say in a fantasy book, and then the editor would be like, tune that down. That's too outrageous for someone to say. Sure does. We now have the technological tools to quite literally code nature, and the payoff to human flourishing will be profound, Mark Andreessen. I don't think this is about like, maybe it's about gene editing. I'm not familiar with this person, so maybe it's about like CRISPR and stuff, but maybe not. Andre says, Python 2 is a Linux system tool still implemented in core distributions. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can't move, but if you can, good too. And then just sort of like a long list of people saying things. Yep. Anyway, like I said, good to be realistic and honest about the benefits and limitations of the technology that we work on. All right. And then I know we talked a little bit about sort of like image generation, but I don't know. I would say that in general, people in ML are not great about finding and listening to other stakeholders. So this is from an art-focused Mastodon, and it's a discussion about, you know, AI generative art. So I'm just going to read the points, and I think they're good to think about. As far as I know, images are built on mining the work and therefore labor of existing artists. Yes, much of it scraped, not against. Yes, correct. Not entirely dismissing its role as an artistic tool, but if choosing to use it as such, I think it's important to consider the non-consensual use of others, including your own and your peers' artwork in these processes. That's a good point, yes. That and also the legal ownership of said images, plus possible energy expenditures. So energy expenditures here being like training the model and then using the model. Re-ownership, I saw someone post this earlier, which is apparently an odd precedent in US law, but for full transparency, I don't know much about this space. So all content generated by Midjourney services, including generated images, is owned by Midjourney, not you. Content is licensed to you under the Creative Commons Non-Commercial 4.0 Attribution International License, the Asset License, which full text is available here as of the effective date, right? So this is a generation service where you are, I don't actually know how this generation service works. I don't know if you've gotten this impression, but I'm not a big fan of image generation sort of in general. And so I've never used this service. And I don't know if this is something where you produce the prompt and then an image is produced, or you take an image and the image is sort of transformed. I've sort of seen both. Re-energy expenditure. I don't know anything about this, but I saw someone on Bird's Eye talk about using it for groundbreaking results that honestly just could have been achieved with some curiosity and collage. I wonder how much power this process might be using en masse in the long run for ease. Great question. A lot. Especially, we talked about the... remember where it was, this one. So when we talked about sort of the energy expenditure of language models, images are many more data points than language models in terms of, just flops and stuff. So yeah, it's expensive. So yeah, I just think it's a good discussion to look into from a sort of related field. Yeah. Oh, so here's someone who has been using other artists' names as prompts and did some testing. So this is like text-based prompts. While using an artist the AI knows as a prompt definitely produces a resulting image with a particular style. For the ones I've tried, it doesn't produce an artwork that looks like it was done by the prompted artist, which is interesting. But it is, drawing on their work to create something that they did not create. Yeah, which I don't know what the law is going to be, but if I were an artist, I'd probably feel pretty weird about that. There are some exceptions like Geiger, so I'm specifically not using those. Yeah. Yeah. And then this is the last tweet we're going to look at, which is good because my voice is going. And this is from Giada Pistilli. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I'm pretty sure that's Italian. Who is an ethicist at Hugging Face and a PhD candidate at Sorbonne. Oh, it's French. Hey, people in Europe go to other universities. So again, I talked about how, it's important to be accurate. And it's also important to focus attention and energy onto things that are solvable. So this is her discussion of sort of her problems getting other philosophers to understand what AI is and not sort of like the I shouldn't say intentionally, possibly intentionally misleading hype that they've been fed about it from other sources. I will no longer engage in philosophical discussions about conscious AI / superintelligence machines, and here's why. I've been studying AI ethics and the philosophy of technology since 2017. At the very beginning, I also used to think of the problem of superintelligent machines was an urgent issue to address philosophically. People used to quote Hawking and talk about human replacement. People were, and still are, pretty scared about these predictions and want philosophers to talk about human existence in the AI era. When I started to work in an AI company, Hugging Face, and dug through those technical questions, I understood there were lots of misunderstandings, fantasies, and fakeries around AI. And I think this is sort of like the key point. Those things exist as a result of non-careful communication of people within the field. Some of it benignly, right? Just like miscommunication, some of it, intentionally overstating things for, clout, hype, funding money, and some of it just like people straight up lying. I don't think there's a lot of that, I hope, but there's a little bit. I rationalized my arguments and directed them to specific and existing problems, to name a few: acceptability and adaptability of AI, underrepresentation of minority cultures and languages, big problem, treatment of human beings behind the AI curtain, so like the moderators that we were talking about. Yet it was, and is still, difficult to find literature in philosophy dealing with these questions. And at every conference I attend, I find myself clarifying the technical aspects on which I apply ethics without getting valuable feedback on my approach. I feel alone and misunderstood in my own field, philosophy. For example, I was told today that talking about pressing problems in AI technology while leaving out the issue of superintelligence machines is negligent and irresponsible, which I would strongly disagree with. I would actually say that talking about superintelligent machines is the thing that is negligible and irresponsible. Not only does this way of thinking hurt the philosophical field, but focusing on these sci-fi issues only perpetuates the collective panic that exists around these technologies while neglecting their actual risks. Yeah, this is the tweet that made me be like, oh, I gotta talk about this. No, I do not feel negligent or irresponsible. On the contrary, I find it negligent and irresponsible not to encourage philosophical studies in AI on empirical research and along AI practitioners. And I will say that some of the people who are loudest about the harms of, superintelligent machines directly financially benefit from not having philosophical investigation into the ethics of current existing AI systems that they are directly profiting from. In the meantime, AI systems exist, are pervasive, and pose countless ethical and social justice questions. Philosophers, do interdisciplinary research and help your colleagues find specific issues on which to focus. And above all, if you feel an urgency to discuss matters concerning conscious AI/superintelligence machines, do not contact me. Thank you. Cheers. Yeah, I can appreciate that sentiment. I think I'm a little bit more willing to talk about it than she is, but more from a technical practitioner standpoint and less from a philosophical standpoint, because I see how that could get real old real fast. All right. Well, that was all I had for today. My voice is going. I don't know if you can tell. And I just want to do a last little, just FYI. So I have started a coffee, which is ko-fi, and it's the same. This one is the little cup. Same as everywhere else, RCTATMAN. And if you would like all the links for today, they are available to members. So thank you to Phil and Code Z for supporting me. I really appreciate it. I would love to do this, into the future. I've got a little bit of wiggle room, but how sustainable this is sort of like my job that I do. Really depends on how valuable people find it and are willing to support it. So I would appreciate it. Thank you in advance. So if you join for $1 a month, you'll get all the links, and I'll upload them every week before the stream. This one was particularly long. I cannot promise that they will all be this long. Let me pop this down a little bit. Nope, not that one. So you can see just how many tabs I had open. It was a lot, but we got through them all. So thank you for joining me today. I hope this was useful, interesting, you had a good time. And I will not be streaming on Tuesday. I actually have a talk at a summer school that overlaps time-wise, but if everything goes according to plan, I've been having some electrical issues in the house. So hopefully no problems. Hopefully the electricity continues to happen and doesn't stop happening. I'm hoping to record a video that I will premiere on Tuesday that will talk about something we didn't talk about today that did happen last week. And I'm going to be a little bit vague because the person who did the thing, I don't think it deserves any positive attention. So thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. I hope you found this helpful. Yeah. Thank you for joining, Alex. Thank you for joining, Naveen. I needed a thread. The amount of things I've heard AI will solve, or AI practitioners using AI as a way to blow up their own egos, are unbelievable. Yeah, it is. Andre says, what do you think about the Vosk offline speech recognition API? Is it better than the one from Amazon, Google, etc.? I have never used it, so no opinion. Yep. All right. Thanks so much for joining today, everybody. There will be a video on Tuesday. Hopefully, I'll announce on YouTube if there isn't. And then next Thursday, we'll be back. Same type of stream, talking about things. And I will drink more coffee. So have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.